my friends, it is officially Halloween. And I know technically we still have like 2 weeks left for Halloween, but in my heart it is Halloween because as soon as it gets below 70 degrees and the leaves start changing and it turns October, more importantly, it is officially Halloween time. Everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is October and this is Nerd Boy Reads, a channel in which I talk about the stuff I've been reading regardless of how much I like it. And today I decided that since it is Halloween and Halloween season and spooky season, I am going to give you a rundown of my favorite horror books. Now, I did a video earlier about my favorite series and books in general, but this is just specifically gonna be for horror books, considering that it's the time, and I don't think I ever did like a dedicated video to my favorite horror books. I may do a breakdown of my favorite fantasy series in like November because fantasy is pretty autumnal to me, but for now we're just gonna be talking about my horror books and or horror adjacent books depending on what I consider them to be personally. This video isn't going to be in any particular order, but I am going to start with a runner-up, and that is The Troop by Nick Cutter. I am going to put this here specifically because I just finished it, and it will be in my October wrap-up, but for a brief rundown of why I like it so much, it is one of those books that I like that really gets under my skin and makes me squirm, and it makes me like, it had me thinking about it as after I finished it. Like, there are still some things that I think about. I finished this maybe a couple days ago, maybe a week ago at most, and I'm still thinking about some of the stuff that happened in this book because it just sits with me. Although there are some scenes I find gratuitous, and a lot of the stuff could have been like either not written, like it didn't really add anything to the plot, it still was an overall good book that I would read again if I was given the opportunity, and if my TBR wasn't already so long. So this has become one of my favorite horror books. I cannot wait to get into more of Nick Cutter's works. I'm specifically eyeing Little Heaven because that is a cult book and I am in a pretty culty mood right now, but this right now holds one of the top spots of my favorite horror books currently. Next, we have something that could be considered horror adjacent, considering that it does play up on the political satire sometimes, and it is more comedic than anything, and that is It Devours, a Night Vale novel by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Cranor. This made me realize that Night Vale is technically considered a horror podcast. While this isn't one of the like scariest books on this list, honestly it doesn't even break the top 5 things that like actually haunted me, it did have moments that made me realize, wow, Night Vale is technically considered a horror. I should probably tell you what this book is about. This is about a scientist and an ex-cult member who discover that fucked up shit is happening and they have to put a stop to it, essentially. Like all things Welcome to Night Vale, this is hard to explain. It's hard to go into detail without spoiling it because anything I want to say about it is a spoiler, and not a lot of people talk about Welcome to Night Vale stuff, especially It Devours, and I want more people to read it before I talk about it. But I did give a breakdown about it in my, I want to say, July wrap-up, so if you want more details about it, read it there. But this book is very good. It has moments that made me squirm, it had moments that made me like stop reading because it was really tense, and it had moments that made me keep reading because it was really tense. I really like the way that the characters were developed. It's an all-around really good, really well fleshed out, well thought out story. A lot of the characters in here are like just background characters in Welcome to Night Vale, and they are really fleshed out into being their own person. Especially we get a lot of surprising development from Carlos, who is kind of a main character in the whole Welcome to Night Vale verse, but seeing him in this role, how he developed in this story in specific, was really refreshing to his character, and it was just all around good. I enjoyed it. So yeah. Not really scary though, it's more of like a vibe story, but the moments that are like considered horror do hit really hard when they need to, so that's why I'm putting it on this list. Next one is more psychological thriller, psychological horror if you want to consider it a horror book, but I consider it more of a psychological thriller, and that is The Long Walk by Stephen King. This is probably my favorite Stephen King book. This is about a group of boys who start this tradition, this yearly tradition called the Long Walk, in which they just set out and they walk and they walk and they walk, and they have to maintain a certain pace and a certain speed, and they can't fall behind, they can't stop, they can't slow down for anything, or they catch their ticket, essentially. There is not a lot of development besides the slow decline into insanity that goes on into this book. A lot of it is kind of outdated, especially how they discuss women and people of color and homosexuality, you know, classic Stephen King for his time. It's definitely a for his time period book, but it's still, a lot of the stuff still holds up, and it has become one of my favorite Stephen King books to this day, albeit I've only read 4, but it's definitely the top slot from the ones that I have read. I think I gave this one also a review in one of my wrap-ups on this channel. This could have been on my channel. I don't know. If it's not, let me know. But I'm still not going to go into a lot of detail because this is something that you have to read and experience yourself. It made me shudder. It has tension. There are some moments where I'm just screaming at the characters to make better decisions. Like, don't sign up for this stuff. But it's a guy book, you know what the kind is. And if you want to get into Stephen King, I highly recommend this because this is one of his first books, I want to say. I don't know, I'm not a historian. Someone will correct me about what order Stephen King's books come out in. But this is definitely an older Stephen King book. So if you want to start with something, start with this, because I just think it's a good book to start with. It gives you a feel for his writing style, what the time period he wrote in is, and it's just a really solid read in general. I think I picked this up and finished it in 2 or 3 sittings. So yeah, definitely a good horror book, just right for this season, and I highly recommend it. Keeping on track with Stephen King books, we have Misery. This is about a writer who gets stranded in the wintertime with his biggest fan, and she begs him and tortures him into writing another book in the series that he just finished. I didn't know a lot going into this book. I haven't seen the movie. I've only heard pretty much the basic synopsis about what happened in this book. This is my first time reading this book this year. This has become everyone's favorite book, and while it's not a favorite for me, it's definitely in the top 2 because I've only read 4, but whatever. It's definitely had its dated moments, like I said about The Long Walk. It is definitely dated in some places. I don't think this is an accurate representation of mental health at all, but it's still really good. This book bleeds tension. This book is definitely more psychological than anything. The mind games, how everyone tries to manipulate each other, and the stuff that goes on just makes me shudder. There's an axe involved, the pills, everything about this book is something that I love. It should have been a higher up on my favorite books list, but since there are a lot of outdated stuff, I do have to rank it kind of low. But despite all of that, if you can handle it, I highly recommend making this another one of your first Stephen King reads if you don't read The Long Walk. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this book because it is a horror book, and I do believe that a lot of horror should be experienced kind of blind. That's just my personal opinion, but I will say you can either read this in the winter or around this time and it still fits because of the setting, the isolation, the pressing loneliness, the tension about being alone and when you're not alone. It's just, it plays games with you, and I love it so much. So if you want to read it, I highly recommend it. If you haven't checked it out, I know a lot of people have checked it out because this is either the book that they love the most or the book that they started with because they heard it, other people loved it so much. Either way, if you haven't, like I am, if you're one of the few people like I was who haven't read this yet, I highly recommend giving it a read, especially around this season. There's just something about it that feels right for this era, you know? I've talked about this next book in the 5 books that make up my reading taste video, and I spoke about it briefly, but that is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This is about a group of housewives that realize that a vampire is living in their homes, and they do their best to stop it. This book is gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss to the extreme. The amount of mental games that are played in this book to make the main character feel like she's insane is insane. The tension, the horror elements, really pack a punch. There's a lot of like misogyny and stuff that's also horrific, but again, it's for the time period that it's written in. But it still doesn't take away, it adds to the horror, in fact, about what goes on in this situation. How no one believes, it is a classic things are going on and no one believes the main character thing, but it's just done so well in this book. A lot of these books, I'm not going to go into a lot of spoilers because I'm pretty sure everyone and their mother has read this book because it was one of the best books of last year. I think it's when it came out. Either last year or 2020 is when it came out, and it got a lot of hype then for good reason. This book is phenomenal. I could not put it down. My sister just ordered it and I'm like, you have to read it, especially for this season. This could be considered like a summer horror too. It's also a really good creature feature, but definitely check the trigger warnings for this one. Like if you do go into it, like for all of these books, I should say, check the trigger warnings because there is a lot of them in here, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but just know that they're there, they're present, be aware of them going into it. I don't hear a lot of people talking about a lot of the trigger warnings that need to be addressed in this book, but it is one of my favorite books. It's like the first Grady Hendrix books, and I read a majority, if not all of his books that have come out so far. I still have the Final Girl support group that I need to read, but this is definitely one that I have read most recently, and it's by far his best writing. I enjoy the characters, I enjoy the pacing, I enjoy the tension that is woven throughout the book. The time period that it's set in is phenomenal. The atmosphere, this book kind of made me want to be a house spouse for some reason. I don't know why. Like, I've been, despite everything that this woman goes through in this book, it still made me want to become a house spouse and take care of it, everything, and just live life to the fullest while not working. I could just be depressed, but either way. Start with this if you want to read like Grady Hendrix's works. I do feel like it is his strongest work so far. Like I said, I haven't read the Final Girl support group, but it is right there on my TBR. But I do recommend starting with this or My Best Friend's Exorcism. That just had a Netflix adaptation, so I'm pretty sure that's becoming popular. But do pick this up if you find you want to either introduce yourself to Grady Hendrix's work or you like the My Best Friend's Exorcism and you want more of his work. Definitely pick this one up. If I had to say one of his least strong works is definitely Horror Store, so take that as you will. But this one is definitely his strongest in my opinion. So yeah. I haven't really heard a lot of people talk about this next book or this next author in general, so I'm going to bring my attention to it. I'm going to bring at least some attention to it because I did love it so much my first time reading it last year. The book I'm talking about is The Child Thief by Brom. This is kind of a modern day Peter Pan retelling, horrified, like made into a horror book. It's so good. There's, like I said, about another one of Brom's works. There is little art. Brom draws his own covers and he makes little pictures to go with each of the main characters and whatnot, as well as draws little pictures for each chapter that really gives you the feel for what's going on in this book, in his books, in all of his books. This is by far one of my favorite, second only to Krampus, because Krampus is mwah. Regardless, The Child Thief. This is another one that you have to look up trigger warnings for because, as you can imagine, with a horrifying Peter Pan retelling, there's going to be plenty of them. So do look into that. But the character development is slow. It progresses really well. It feels really realistic to the situation that these characters are put in and what's going on around them, I should say. The development is flawless. The setting, the descriptions just settle into your bones. And when I say this is a horror, there are things in here that are horrific. So again, I cannot stress this enough. Look up the trigger warnings for this book. Since it has been a year since I have read this book, I can't give you a lot of strong details about what goes on in it without spoiling it because the main things that stick with me are massive spoilers. So maybe I'll do a video in the future reading all of his works, especially once Slewfoot comes out in paperback. That's what I'm waiting for, like I said, in my first time going through his work. I can't remember which one. This is an author that I'm collecting in paperback. So once Slewfoot comes out in paperback, I will definitely do a full breakdown of all of Brom's books. But was my first. I highly recommend it being your first. If you haven't read from this author, I highly recommend it. The way he crafts his worlds is spectacular. His characters feel like people you either want to befriend or murder, and there's no in between, really. You also have a habit of feeling sorry for his characters because, again, the situations they're put in are realistic and they're sad, and they just make you want to like either curl up and die or fight someone, because that's what the main things I alternated between in this book, where I wanted to either hug the people or fight them. There's rarely an in between them, or I wanted to be them, but whatever. He's very gender, whatever. Highly recommend this book if you want to start with them, but again, be mindful of the trigger warnings. Yeah. And we have a book that I read another book that I read relatively recently, but this one came out this year. I read it last month, and it totally fits. I should have put it in this month's, but I read it early because I couldn't help myself. This is The Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. This is about a trans boy named Benji who escapes a cult who actually succeeded in ending the world and joins up with his local LGBTQ community to try to save the world. He's also been infected with the virus that makes him superior to all beings, so yeah. This has really good body horror in it. Like, the descriptions of Benji's transformations, I've said this in my last month's wrap-up, the descriptions of what Benji goes through while transforming in this book are horrific. The descriptions of the creatures are horrific. It's just so good. The descriptions in general are good. The character development, really spectacular. This is a good apocalypse horror, post-apocalypse horror, I should say. And a good, like, creature feature-y book with a a taste of body horror. If that doesn't get you, I don't know what will. It's kind of like, I don't want to call it extreme horror because it's not. I read The Troop. That's considered like beginner extreme horror. This is like beginner extreme horror. Like, this is gross. This is apocalyptic. You cannot tell who's gonna live and who's gonna die in this book. Everything is just really tense. The layers of like stuff that goes on in this book are phenomenal, and not a lot of people are talking about it, so I need more people to talk about this. Do look up trigger warnings. Again, I say this a lot, but trigger warnings, definitely. I ran on about it in my wrap-up, but I don't think I described it very well, but I'm not going to do that here. That's not what this video is about, but I am going to recommend this if you want an intro to horror, if you want like a good seasonal horror, if you want to get scared but not too scared, definitely pick this one up. This is like on the lighter side, I believe. This is probably one of the lightest horror books I'm putting on this list besides It Devours, and I think one more? No, I think this is one of the lighter ones. So yeah, definitely pick this up if you want like intro teen horror. Like, it's young adult, so it can't get too bad, but still look up the trigger warnings for it. Yeah, good book. Highly good book. Look at this cover. A book with the cover this stunning has to be good, right? It lives up to it, I promise. We have a book that had a sequel come out, but I still haven't picked it up yet, so don't ask about it. This is Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Caesar. This is about a girl who moves into a small town and then gets hunted with her friends at a Halloween party. It's a classic teen slasher movie in book form. This is, again, another one of the lighter ones because it can only go so far with the blood and guts that it goes into because it is young adult, but the blood and guts that are described were a lot more graphic than I was anticipating from a young adult book. This is definitely something to read this season. This has all Halloween vibes, all fall vibes. It's, like I said, classic teen slasher. If you like survival horror, if you like slasher movies, this is a slasher movie in a book. So it's really quick read. I think I've read it in like 2 or 3 sittings, and I am looking forward to reading the sequel. It is so good. It's on everyone's TBR for a good reason. So I'm not going to say much about it, besides look up the trigger warnings again. I can say that for all these books, like I said. And yeah, pick it up. If you haven't, I'm pretty sure everyone and their parent, again, has picked up this book because it is good. It does fall into some tropes, I'm not gonna lie. It does have, like, stilted character development. The ending is kind of cheesy, and some of the stuff that happens just kind of feels like it came out of left field. No pun intended. But despite all of that, if you just want a nice little slasher romp, a nice little slasher, shut your brain off and just watch people die, I highly recommend it because it's just good for that. It scratches that itch if you want to see people just get mercilessly murked. So, yeah, highly recommend it. I'm probably going to pick up the second one soon because I want to, and no one can really stop me. So maybe you'll see that in my October wrap-up if I can get to it. Even if I can't, you probably will see it. Whatever. No spoilers, because I haven't even bought it yet. But whatever. Pick this one up. Good. And then finally, we have a nice little creature feature book. This is Deevolution by Max Brooks. This is a Bigfoot horror. My friend recently read this and she gave it a rave review. All of the characters are awful. There are like 2 characters that deserve to live in this book. It's about a woman who lives in this like experimental commune, an experimental living facility, and all of a sudden this massive earthquake triggers a volcano to erupt and they're stranded on the top of a mountain and Bigfoot starts to show up and kill people. This is told in like found media, found journal entries. It's mostly a journal entry with some like newspaper clippings and articles splattered in, but this is mainly one woman's journal, and it's interesting. Like I said, all the characters are detestable, but it's fun. It's like a fun detestable. Like you just want to see how their personalities match up with the personalities of trying to survive. And it's great. It's so much fun. It's a good creature feature, like I said. It's fun. If you just want it's another one of those shut your brains off and read. It's because it's really quick to get through. It's not that long, but it packs a punch for what it does. It's good for what it does. That's what I'll say about it. And even then, it's really good. I read this book a while ago. So that's why I'm just kind of circling around. It was good. It was good. I don't remember a lot of what happened. Not gonna lie and say I did. But I do remember the ending was satisfying. Like everything that happens in this book felt like it happened for a reason, and it gradually built up to the ending, and it made sense for what happened in this book. And that's what I really like about books in general, horror books or not. If it feels satisfying going through the motions of seeing what happens in the end, it works. And it works. Since I'm just kind of circling around it, I'm not going to keep talking about it for long because I swear I read this, I just can't talk about it. Maybe I'll pick it up next year and give it a reread because I feel like I'm going to end up reading World War Z again because I just picked that up. And I really like how Max Brooks tells horror in like this found journalistic kind of way. You know, it's like a found footage film, but book. That's what I'll say about it. If you like found footage films like Cloverfield, pick this one up. It's a good creature feature found footage book. Does that make sense? The first Cloverfield. I don't know about the other ones, but the first Cloverfield slapped and really gives off this kind of vibe. The found footage, found after events happen in a monster kind of situation. So yeah, good. That is it for this video. I know it was kind of short. I know I kind of glossed over a lot of things. Like I said, horror is one of those genres I believe you should go into mostly blind. So if you want more information about it, go read spoilers, go read up on it. Check all the trigger warnings for all these books that I've mentioned today. But it's actually an advantage that I don't remember a lot of what happened in these last couple of books because now you get to get invested and go read them yourself, which I highly recommend because not a lot of people talk about Deevolution or Hell Followed With Us, and they should. They're so good and not a lot of people talk about them. So pick them up. If you pick up any of them, let me know in the comments because I would love to know your opinions about them and maybe you'll spark my memory and make me want to read them again, even though I'm probably going to end up reading them again anyway. Definitely pick up Brom. Brom is a good horror author who does a lot of good found family as well, and I cannot wait to read the second Connor to Cornfield book. Don't spoil that for me. I feel like I know where it's going, but I still want to read it myself. Nevertheless, that's this video. I hope I gave you some good recommendations for this spooky season of mine. My next video I think is going to be manga that give me kind of Halloween vibes. Not really like scary, but like just the vibes for Halloween. Like if you want a good Halloween feel, but not to get scared, these are going to be the manga for you. So look out for that video. I'm pretty sure I'm going to try to get it up soon. So yeah, that's been this video. I've been October. This has been Nerd Boy Reads. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!